Is Missouri filled with a bunch of backwards rednecks? Is St. Louis the most dangerous murder capital in the nation? And is Missouri in the South or the Midwest?
Now we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more. So grab some Budweiser and some fireworks. We're going to unbox the state of Missouri.
Well, look at this. That sure looks like a lot of fun, huh? This is the Lake of the Ozarks, and it's smack dab in the middle of Missouri. This is one of the largest man-made lakes in the country. It's 92 miles long, and there's more shoreline on this lake than the entire state of California. Every summer, people come from all over the Midwest to drink too much and drive their boats too fast. And lots of people live along its banks too, including a lot of second homeowners. There's 70,000 docks and 900 campgrounds on this shoreline. Can you imagine that? This is just one of many awesome places to visit in Missouri when you want to get outside. Missouri's very diverse, and there's all sorts of stuff going on besides big lakes. There's forests, mountains, sorta, wide open plains, and big huge ghettos. But if you're thinking of moving to Missouri, you gotta know where the best places are and where the worst places are and where the perfect home for you is. That way you'll fit right into the show me state. This is Missouri. Now, as you can see, there's 6 various regions in this state, and each one is really different from the other. Missouri is kind of a transition zone between the South and the Midwest. It's considered a southern state, but it's not all southern. The bottom half is very southern, but the more north you go, the more Midwest Missouri is. It's very much Yankee versus Confederate, urban versus rural, blue versus red, and Missouri versus Missourah. I'll just call it the northernmost southern state. How's that? And no, Missouri is not a 69,709 square mile trailer park. There's much more to it than that, mister. We're going to begin our discovery of Missouri up here in the northernmost part of the state. Now, way up here, it's very much Midwest. The top corner of the state's more like Kansas and Iowa than anything else. There's a ton of farming up this way, mostly corn and beans. Expect to see a lot of Wrangler-wearing farmer types and a bunch of small towns. Many of these small Missouri farming towns have anywhere between 500 and 10,000 people. There's not a lot going on up here, which is kind of a good thing, I guess. In many of these small Missouri towns, it's high school football, and the drama on your street is when somebody blows their grass clippings on your driveway. But lots of these small towns are shrinking up here. That's because technology means there's less people needed to farm. And younger people these days, they leave for bigger cities. They don't want to farm. Many of Missouri's small farming towns are only about half as big as they once were. Your income will go a lot further up here. Your opinions will not. As you might expect, much of rural Missouri is going to be conservative and somewhat intolerant of outside views and backgrounds, but that's just how it is in rural America. Deer hunting's a big deal up here in the northern part of the state. There's some big bucks to be shot up in these parts, I'll tell you that. Hunting and fishing is actually something you do quite a bit of if you moved here and you wanted to fit in. St. Joseph is the biggest city up here. There's about 75,000 people here. You could live in St. Joseph and only be about a half hour away from Kansas City. Homes here are super cheap too, like $113,000, but it's rural-ish Missouri. What'd you expect? However, be aware of the crime here. St. Joseph is in the top 10 of all Missouri cities for crime, especially when you consider robberies. It's also pretty run down here in many areas, so you might not like it here. Now over here is the other side of the state, clearly. It's not much different than the western half, more small towns, farms, and deer hunting. But Hannibal is a world-famous place. This is where Mark Twain grew up. You know, the guy who wrote Huck Finn.
What do? I don't go to school and don't get promoted, that's what I do.
Won't you run away to your pap?
Oh, his pap's dead. Ain't that so, Huck?
No, I judge he's alive. They thought they found him floating on his back in the river, but shucks, anybody knows a drunk don't float on his back.
And they're holding on to that really hard, still to this day. Hannibal's a really quiet place along the Mississippi River, home to about 17,000 people, and it's the biggest city up here in this part of the state. It's really kind of quiet. There's a saying, in Missouri, it's less a matter of the worst place you can live as it is the best place you can die. Central Missouri has a lot of really wonderful places and some really lousy ones. Down here, away from the vast farmland, it's going to be much more green and hilly. And there's a ton of stuff to do for all the rednecks who make this part of the state their home. There's the Mark Twain National Forest over here, and then there's the Missouri River, which cuts right through the heart of the state. And then there's the Lake of the Ozarks. Now this place is wild, and there's some stuff that goes on here that would make you lose all faith in the future of America. It's a lot of speedboats and bikinis and beer. It's certainly not a quiet, serene place for a lake vacation, I'll tell you that. And it's also not very clean. The water has a reputation as being contaminated with bacteria, boat gas, used condoms, and stale beer. There's a lot of old-timers who have been here forever, and there's a lot of wealthy second homeowners here too. In fact, 40% of all Midwesterners who have a second home have their second home here at Lake of the Ozarks. That's really interesting. Osage Beach is a popular place for regular people, but the Party Cove is where all the crazy young people are. In fact, this was called the biggest floating, out-of-control party in the nation on July 4th. 3,000 boats come here to do what you think they would do. It's a crazy place. Nearby is the equally massive but much more quiet Truman Lake, which is filled with a lot of tree stumps. Table Rock, down at the bottom of the state, is much more quiet and has great bass fishing. That's where you want to go if that's your thing. This part of the state here is called the Rhineland region of Missouri. The soil and topography here make growing grapes really easy, so there's a lot of wineries right here. And during Prohibition, they actually moved their operations underground into local caves. Caves are a big deal in Missouri. Here in Franklin County are the Merrimack Caverns, the largest of Missouri's vast underground caves. In fact, Missouri is known as the Cave State because there's more than 6,400 discovered caves here. Wow, lots of caves. Jesse James hid in some of these caves at some point. At least that's what the billboards say. The billboards will also remind you about Uranus Fudge Factory, located here along I-44, just north of Fort Leonard Wood. This is a pretty big army base, which has a footprint on the local area. Nearby are small neighboring towns like St. Roberts and Waynesville, which have strip malls with everything a GI could want. Barbecue wings, gun stores, shooting ranges, tattoo parlors, strip clubs, tiki bars, and of course, fudge from Uranus. Missouri's annual state fair is located here in Sedalia in the heart of Pettis County, and the Budweiser Clydesdales are bred here in a small town called Boonville in Cooper County. But for the most part, much of central Missouri is relatively inexpensive and uncrowded. If you lived in central Missouri, there's a good chance it would be in one of two major metro areas, Columbia or Jefferson City. Columbia is a liberal and cultural bastion in an otherwise sea of red. It's a college town, home to the University of Missouri, or Mizzou. They're a pretty big deal in these parts. Outside of their love for the Cardinals, Chiefs, or Royals, Mizzou sports are widely followed. There's 120,000 people in Columbia, and it's growing at a decent clip. Many say it's the perfect size community. Downtown has a lot of culture and entertainment, and it's all centered around the university itself. You'll get a little bit of everything here. College kids, snobs, hipsters, country ghetto, and working professionals. Home prices here are only $222,000, so get in on that, people. Jefferson City is here. It's the state capital, but it's not very interesting. There's only 42,000 people here, and there aren't even any major highways leading into town. It's not too bad a place to live, and it's sort of boring. If you're a conservative or a churchgoer, this would be a much better choice than Columbia. Homes here are even cheaper. You can get one like this for about $178,000 on average, but it's Jefferson City. Now you're probably thinking, hey, Missouri just seems like a normal Midwest state to me. Who'd have thunk it? But you ain't seen nothing yet. You ain't seen Missourah. All along I-70 and I-44 are the big cities in the state, but everything below I-44 is going to be way different. Way. If the top half of the state's Iowa or Illinois, the bottom half of this state is Arkansas. The further south you get, the more southern it gets. It's very much conservative, religious, hillbilly, redneck, meth heads, and tweakers. Many of the folks down here, they're good folks who mean well, a lot of them. Some of them don't. There's a lot of southern draws, southern cooking, and southern jargon. Down here, everything's Obama's fault, or everything's to glorify Trump. The Ozark Mountains are down this way. In fact, almost the whole southern half of the state is some form of hilly and foresty. This makes good for caving, and there's a ton of places down here to float. If you moved here and you don't know what a float is, you will soon partake in a summer float. It's a lot of beer, inner tubes, sunburns, and bug bites down here in Deliverance country. Of course, the beer gets its own tube. It's sort of like the days of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, but they didn't drink beer. They were too young for that. The Ozarks are one of the prettiest parts of the country, but also one of the poorest. The southern half of the Ozarks is the Dixie part of the state, where there's lots of poor, small towns and a lot of drugs. Now, this is where the negative stereotypes of Missouri come from. Down here, it's a lot of generational poverty and a lot of misplaced pride. There's lots of Jeds and Trixies. There's a lot of Bobby Rays and tons of Peggy Sues. You'd meet some Billy Joes and definitely meet some Earleens. Missouri ranks first in the nation for meth labs. Can you believe that? Right here in the middle of the country. Over here in the Boot Hill area is the worst of it all. This is where meth use is skyrocketing. There's a lot of petty crime and lots of thefts to support drug habits. This is where you'd find a lot of Missouri's outback hillbilly meth head Hoosiers. That's a Missouri term for rednecks. Places like Poplar Bluff, Caruthersville, and Sykeston, they've fallen on hard times. And it's even worse in the teeny towns you've never even heard of, might not ever see. If you move to Missouri, don't move to the Boot Hill part of the state, unless you want to basically live in Arkansas. Cape Girardeau, here along the mighty Mississippi, is likely the nicest part of this part of the state. It has a nice riverfront downtown area, but it's also really sketchy in lots of other parts of town. In many of these smallish southeast Missouri communities, there just aren't any good jobs, and kids get the hell out of town if they want to get somewhere in life. It's really sad. Folks in this part of the state seem to come in two sizes. They're either obese or meth skinny. Walmart's very much aware of this, and all the shirts are either extra small, XXX, XXX, or quadruple X. There's nothing really in between. Over here in Sykeston is Lambert's, which is sadly one of the biggest tourist draws here in southeast Missouri. This is where they throw the rolls at you when you sit down. Don't eat them off the ground. Poplar Bluff has one of Missouri's many Boomland locations. That's a giant warehouse where they sell fireworks. Fireworks are a big deal in Missouri, I'll tell you that. Now over here in the southwest part of the state, it's different. There's actually some bigger cities and way less poverty. This is the conservative Bible-thumping part of Missouri down here, boy. Joplin's here. It's actually the 5th most dangerous city in the state and more known for tornadoes than anything else. Branson down here is basically a teeny little Las Vegas / Pigeon Forge, Tennessee clone. There's lots of 4 p.m. dinner buffets and knockoff wannabe Vegas shows. Traffic along the strip here is terrible in the summer. There's lots of country music and lots of places to drive golf carts. You could say anyone under 7 or over 70 would have a good time in Branson. And of course, we talked about Table Rock Lake. That's nearby here. That's a big deal for fishing. While duck hunting is big in the Boot and deer hunting is big in the northern part of the state, down here, it's fishing, fishing, fishing. I mean, Bass Pro Shops has its headquarters in Springfield. And get this, bass fishing is actually a high school sport in lots of schools here. Can you imagine that? How redneck that is. You can actually letter and bass fishing down here in Missouri. Lots of the rednecks in Missouri actually seem to have plenty of income to blow on pickup trucks and fishing boats. They're good folks though. Many are nature enthusiasts, they're conservationists, and they're very charitable. Like a lot of hunters down here donate their meat to food banks and homeless shelters, which is really cool. Some stand-up rednecks in these parts, I'll tell you that. Springfield's a medium-sized city with a small town feel. It's the 3rd biggest city in the state with 180,000 people. This place is super conservative and really religious. They've tried to fix the place up, but there's a lot of run-down bad parts of town. Springfield is statistically just about the most dangerous city in the whole state when you measure property and violent crimes per capita, although shootings and murders in Greene County are nothing compared to what's going on over here in St. Louis. St. Louis, sadly, remains one of the most segregated cities in the country. There's a street called Delmar Boulevard, which runs west to east in the city. South of Delmar is 73% white. North of Delmar is 98% black. Much of what's below Delmar is considered nicer and safer. Much of northern St. Louis is very run down and ghetto. Areas like Ferguson, Normandy, and Jennings are where about 90% of St. Louis's crime happens. But it's enough to make St. Louis the murder capital of the nation, where there's about a murder 2 out of every 3 days. You can get a home here for like $40K, though you probably wouldn't want to live in this part of town. Overall, though, outside of the North End, much of St. Louis is not too bad, actually. Downtown is clean and pretty safe. They have an awesome zoo and a world-class museum. Of course, this is home to the Arch, tons of breweries, and it's home to Busch Stadium. And that whole area near the ballpark is really booming. There's a decent amount of blues music here, too. St. Louis is a lot of Budweiser, baseball, crime, and rich people. Because over here on the western side of town is this whole wealthy area, sprawly, safe, snobby part of town. Places like Olivet, Creve Coeur, Town and Country, and even out into the western burbs of Lake St. Louis, O'Fallon, Wentzville, and Chesterfield are all where the white-collar folks and doctors and lawyers live. A home here is like $400K on average, but there are many, many, many homes here worth much more than that. The south side of St. Louis is a bunch of working class neighborhoods and a melting pot of all the different ethnicities. There's little Bosnian, Italian, German, and Dutch neighborhoods sprinkled throughout. It's older, but it's not as dangerous since so many people here take pride in their community down this way. And finally, it's time to talk about the biggest city in Missouri, Kansas City. While St. Louis has about 300,000 people, Kansas City has nearly 500,000 people, and it's growing kind of fast. Kansas City, Missouri has a lot of bad parts of town, and crime is certainly terrible here too, but it's not as bad as over in North St. Louis. And there's a lot of tech moving in here, especially for companies that want to set up shop in a much less expensive part of the country. Like St. Louis, Kansas City has a lot of great food, great music, and a huge sports culture. Everyone's heard of KC Barbecue, arguably the best barbecue in the country. They do a sweet barbecue with burn tips. There's 100 barbecue restaurants in Kansas City, Missouri alone. There's kind of a debate as to whether Gates or Jack Stacks is best. But Missourians don't just love barbecue. They're into pizza, frog legs, toasted ravioli, sweet tea, and gooey butter cake, whatever that is.
Open a Budweiser and pour yourself the most inviting glass of beer you've ever tasted.
Sure.
Cold, golden Budweiser with that good taste for good times. So go ahead. Live life, every golden minute of it. Enjoy Budweiser. Every golden drop of it.
As you can imagine, Missouri ranks third in the country for most beer produced per capita, but folks here only drink about the average amount of beer. And it's not just a Budweiser, Bud Light state. There's actually a pretty good craft beer scene here too. Good for you, Missouri. Of course, the Kansas City Royals and Kansas City Chiefs make their home in KCMO. The Chiefs, as well as the Cardinals, are some of the most beloved sports franchises in the country. Now, in terms of where you could live, if you're wealthy, you'd want to live on the far south end of the KC metro area in places like Parkville or Blue Springs. There's a bunch of McMansions. Lee's Summit is probably the safest, cleanest part of the whole KCMO metro area. Raytown is also very nice. What you could consider south middle in areas like the West 39th Street District to Westport and the Plaza area here near the university are where the younger, more progressive people live. It's pretty nice here too. There's bad parts all over KCMO, but generally, east of Troost Avenue is where it gets sketchy. That's where KC's biggest ghetto pockets are. Independence also has a lot of rundown areas on the north side of its town. Harrisonville, down here, has a lot of rednecks. It's kind of all over the place in the KCMO area. But that's Missouri for you. Missouri's got a big gap between the urban and rural areas. In one town, you'll see rednecks who shoot fireworks off down the river. And then one town over is all meth heads who can't seem to get their lives in order. And then 10 miles down the road is a big city. It's a really pretty state with a lot of big sunsets and lots of really pretty forests. It hasn't changed much over time here. It's still very Republican and very religious and very Southern in many parts. There's a strong work ethic here in the Show Me State where people take pride in a job well done. Small cities are shrinking, big cities are growing. It's just sort of average here. It's right in the middle of the country, and it's sort of right in the middle for way of life. They're average wealthy, they have average schools, and the weather is average bad. If it wasn't for St. Louis, it would be average dangerous. Some call living in Missouri misery, but it's not that bad here. Come on now. Missouri, you're certainly not perfect, but at least you're not Illinois.
Okay, so that was a pretty good rundown of the state of Missouri, wasn't it? I think we learned a lot about the Show Me State. Sure is a nice state. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's some really good people in Missouri and some real big cities too. We could have talked about a lot of other stuff too. Like, did you know there's an earthquake that goes out of the state of Missouri? It's in the New Madrid area. It's a big old place where there's earthquakes. In 1811, they had a big earthquake that was such a big one that the mighty Mississippi ran backwards. Sure did. But we don't care about earthquakes in Missouri. We care about tornadoes. In fact, I think I see one outside right now, so I'm going to grab a bud and go out and watch it. And here's a song about Missouri, too.
Missouri rednecks, here's your song, doo-dah, doo-dah. Missouri rednecks, here's your song, old doo-dah day. When I say Missouri, you say you better. You better do meth. When I say Missouri, you say you better. You better redneck. She'll be coming round the trailer when she comes. When she comes, she'll be coming round the trailer when she comes. When she comes, she'll be coming round the trailer. She'll be coming round the trailer. She'll be coming round the trailer when she comes. She'll be riding in a pickup when she comes. When she comes, she'll be riding in a pickup when she comes. When she comes, she'll be riding in a pickup. She'll be riding in a pickup. She'll be riding in a pickup when she comes. When I say Missouri, you say you better. You better do meth. When I say Missouri, you say you better. You better redneck. I better change my life. Hey guys, if you learned something new about America or what it's like to live in America, great. You should think about subscribing and turning on your notifications. You can also click one of these videos or playlists for more. You can also now buy my songs on iTunes and other formats. Click the link in the description. Thanks for watching. And remember, while we all might have different views, we should all be nice to each other and try to make the U.S. a better place in a positive way.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
And are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. So yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on. So I do videos on different states, and I'm doing one on Missouri. And I read your op-ed that you wrote in the Wall Street Journal here a couple months ago, and I really liked what you had to say about what it's like in small town Missouri. And I wanted to hear from you if you could give people a perspective on what it's like to live in a small town in Missouri.
I think people have a cliche of what it's like to live in a place like this. And so the way we live is pretty close, I think, to the way people think about it. And the fact that we have, lots of family around, small businesses, small town, and obviously are working and dealing with people that we've been around their families for a very, very long time. My grandfather moved here. Farmed about 30 miles east of here and moved here in 1931. And my family's still farming the farm he started on in 1931. Actually lease it from a family and have never had a written lease agreement in, I guess, 90 years now. So still operating on a handshake.
Yeah, that's so for the people who live in big towns where there's chaos and protests and homeless people and expensive and traffic. Tell people why you choose to live where you do, where you don't have any of that stuff.
Our corn and soybean farm is a result of my family's efforts, and it's hard to start on your own somewhere else. So when we chose a profession, we chose a place, and we've been happy with it. Our middle daughter grew up here and was very happy to leave to go to college, and worked in Kansas City area for several years, and was I think glad to get out of the small town, found it confining, and then when she and her husband decided to start a family, she called us up and said, we're coming home because I want our kids to have the childhood that I did, with 4-H and 4-H and being able to play all the sports. The kids all play baseball, football, basketball, run track, are in the band or in the FFA. So unlike, I think, in larger places where kids are forced to sort of specialize or concentrate on wherever their talents are, they've been able to do a little bit of everything. So on one night we might go see the kids in the school play, and the next night we'll watch them play football. 8-man football, by the way.
Yeah.
We have enough kids to play 11-man football, but might go watch them play 8-man football. So it is an experience, I think, that becomes more and more rare. As I mentioned in the article, our population has dropped from 2,500 to 1,500 people in just over a decade. So we're seeing a tremendous population decline, and it shows up in the housing. The town. If you drive through our town, you would be a little depressed because a lot of the homes are not taken care of, and the main street is pretty well empty now. Just 3 or 4 businesses left. So that's depressing, and makes us very, very sad as we watch the decline. But we're still able to make a good life, and that's the important thing.
Why are people leaving?
Oh, lack of opportunity. Farming takes less people than it did, which is a story that's, I suppose, been true for since 1920. Well over 100 years, we've seen a drop in people because of technology, because of tractors, because of the science that we apply to farming. It takes less and less people. We're not too. I spent all spring, and when I was doing my planning, fighting the planters actually have guidance. So you start it on the row, hit a button, and then it drives itself, keeping you exactly 30 inches from your last row because it's being controlled or referring to satellites, 3 different satellites, and it knows to within really inches of where it is in the field. And it wasn't working this spring, but the technology has made it so that you can farm more and farm better. And we're not that many years from autonomous tractors and combines, although after my experience of string, maybe a little farther than I thought 6 months ago. But it just takes less people, and so all the support that would have been here for the farm families is no longer needed, whether that be grocery stores or implement dealers or whatever. There's been lots of consolidation in the people that serve farmers. When I grew up, I was 7 miles from the John Deere, 6 miles from the John Deere dealership. Now I'm 40, and we've just seen that in all the industries that serve agriculture as well. So a long-term trend. I'm sure good economic reasons for it, but painful for those of us that are, want to keep our school going and all those things.
What's a farm like yours, and what are farms in the Midwest and in Missouri going to look like in 50 years, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. Livestock production, depending on the species, has consolidated very quickly, and so chicken and hog production is done by very few farmers. We only have one. My kids grow pigs for 4-H projects, and so we have 30 or 40 pigs on feed right now for the various grandkids. But there's almost no one. There's only one pig farmer in the county. So at a time, I looked it up once, in 1900, the census found 100,000 hogs in Addison County, outnumbering the people 10 to 1. And now there's still several thousand hogs, but they're all managed and raised by one person. Cattle farming has not consolidated that quickly, and I believe that's because there's just not the technology that leads itself to those kind of huge operations. Plus, the land ownership is very dispersed, and everybody raising pigs is unpleasant a lot of the times, but everybody wants to be a cowboy. So there's lots of guys in Missouri with smaller farms and herds of 30 or 40 or 50 cows, and I don't see them going anywhere because they're not necessarily farming, raising cows as an economic enterprise. It's more of a lifestyle choice. Grain farming, we've seen the consolidation, but not nearly as rapid in livestock farming. And the reason for that is because of the still wide dispersion of land ownership, and people hang on to their farms. And so it's very difficult and very expensive to put together a really, really large crop farm. So we'll continue to see consolidation. My grandfather would literally have one farmer for 80 acres. Now one farmer is not really viable unless he's farming 800 acres at least. So we've seen that kind of consolidation over the last 80 years in our 3 generations, but not nearly as rapid as we've seen in livestock or in hogs and poultry. So it'll be bigger. It'll look a lot like it does now. It'll continue to be family operated. Um, some farms are organized as corporations, some farms are partnerships, some are limited liability companies. But most crop farms at this point are still controlled and operated by families. And there's reasons for that. Tremendous variation over a year in labor needs. It works pretty well to grab everybody and have them all get involved in harvest, and then they're able to do other things the other parts of the year, which is, of course, our greenhouse started as a diversification that kept my wife employed, and so she'll help us in the fall when we're doing harvest, and I help her in the spring when we're raising flowers. And so we found that way of sort of leveling out the labor needs, but it is because of this huge variation in how much labor during the year it takes. It lends itself to family operations, I think, and I don't really see that changing.
Mm-hmm. Is Missouri more or less reliant on agriculture today versus 50 years ago?
Oh, well, we like to say we're the state's leading industry, and I think we still are. Clearly less less reliant than we were 50 or 100 years ago. Many fewer people involved in agriculture. And the statistic is 2% of people are farmers, and that includes a lot of people. I think the USDA defines a farm as anybody that has more than $1,000 in farm sales. So that includes a lot of farms that are part-time farms, hobby farms, beginning farms. The actual food is raised by well under 1% of the population. And even though we gross more dollars and produce more food than we used to, we're still, a declining part of the population. And that's a wonderful thing. The sadness that I have as I've seen our population decline is balanced by the fact that all those people that left the farm are productive citizens doing great things, right? So they're poets, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're truck drivers, and so our economy has benefited from the increasing specialization and automation of agriculture, even as the place where I live has suffered.
Yeah, what kinds of things have we lost by people not being into farming and small town life, and I'm everything from the work ethic and the pride in the work, and the good old American values and all that stuff. I mean, are we losing the core of how this country was founded by people leaving the profession and kind of doing other things these days?
Can we have a great society and good communities without farms? Sure. Are we going to miss something because of the way that we're raising our kids? Yeah, we are, because they're going to be successful whatever they do, because they know, as my grandfather would say, they've learned how to work, and they absolutely
having nightmares about leaving the gate
open. They've certainly learned responsibilities. The kids still laugh about waking up in the middle of the night and worrying about whether they've left the gate open or whether the water's on to the cattle water. So you teach them that early. And sometimes we see pictures of kids driving tractors and machinery when I think they're probably pretty young to, it's kind of dangerous. But on the other hand, man, they are learning how to, as my grandfather said, they're learning how to grab a hold and do things and accomplish things. And, the great thing about farming, I spent 10 years working in a farm organization and managing people and stuff. And I would work hard all day long. At the end of the day, I wasn't sure I'd accomplished anything. When I go out to the greenhouse and spend a day picking up plants or watering plants, I can look back at the end of the day and know that I've done good work. So that's anytime you're working with your hands and doing physical kind of work, you do see evidence of what you've accomplished, and it's a good feeling.
So what inspires you to write the op-ed in the Wall Street Journal? I know you mentioned the pandemic and people were, Missouri being a new destination for people who were looking to get away from big cities.
Somewhere I saw the statistic that Missouri was the 7th U-Haul tracks where people are moving to and where they're moving from. And Missouri was the 7th leading state as far as destination. And I thought that was unlikely to include the part of Missouri where I live. So I did kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing about what you would have to accept if you moved to Missouri. And I talked about cars and yards and and the way the town looks and the 8-man football and small schools. But I said, on the other hand, our kids were living this year, this school year, a pretty normal life. We had a couple of sporting events that were, where the amount of people who could come was controlled because of the pandemic, but mostly back to normal life, and had a normal school year, and that's really a wonderful thing. But I do think that most of the people in that U-Haul statistic moving to Missouri are probably moving to the central and the southern part of the state, where there's some vibrant economies and beautiful scenery and lots of amenities that we don't necessarily have up here. If you move here, you better like to look at corn and soybeans, because that's what we have.
Yeah, but tell people about the human relationships that you have in a small town versus one in St. Louis, Kansas City, or even bigger cities.
Oh, well, I think the advantage we had a knock on our door last night, and it was a guy, a neighbor guy I went to high school with, or 4-H. I've known him my whole life. And many years ago, my parents' house burned down, and they lost all of their, all their mementos, all their pictures. And he'd been going through some pictures he'd taken for his photography project in 4-H back in the 1970s, and had some pictures of the house where I grew up and our farm that my parents had lost in the fire, and came by and brought them. And he'd made copies for all the members of our family so that we would have them. And wasn't a big deal, but it touched me. Because this is a guy that I've known my whole life and grew up with, and he knew that we no longer had those things, and made sure that we did. So that's the kind of relationships I think you can grow when you live close to somebody for, in my case, 60 some years. Now, you also know everything bad about everybody, and you certainly remember, the kids that were a year or two older than you were in high school that may have hazed you when you were a kid growing up or whatever. So all those memories are there as well. And of course, in the greenhouse business, we have lots of employees, and so everybody in this town has either had a kid work for us, or they've worked for us, or their customers. We know them all. We know them all business wise very, very well, so we know what to expect.
Yeah, I mean, at a time when everyone's trying to kind of reposition their lives and kind of realize, hey, I can work from home. I want a bigger yard. I want space. This whole big city life thing is just not my thing anymore. People are looking to move to cheaper, bigger, more safe areas. And it seems like, the places like your town are getting a lot more attention as an opportunity and a option for people who are just looking to just change their lifestyle.
Yeah, well, we have, as it turns out, because of the way the town was settled and grew around the turn of the last century, we have a lot of just really grand old homes, and they don't come on the market every year, but they come on the market. If you pay attention, you can buy you can buy a 3-story home that's just absolutely beautiful and probably pretty well maintained for $100,000 or not much more than that. That's not something that you can do anywhere in the country. So if you're willing to have a grocery store that may not have every bit of produce that you're used to buying, but has a great meat counter, and you want to have a project of restoring and loving an old home, which is what we've done here in Tarkio, where my wife and I live. We bought an old home about 20 years ago now, and it's been kind of a labor of love ever since. So, you know, you do have that opportunity in small towns, and we, you know, we do have Wi-Fi and the internet and pretty good broadband. Actually, they're spent the last week laying fiber in our neighborhood, so we're going to have some great broadband. So those people that can work from home, it's certainly possible to do so here.
Very, very safe.
I know.
And
Yeah,
I literally have lived here 20 years. I shouldn't say this on YouTube, probably. Literally lived here 20 years and don't know where the keys to my house are. I've never locked it in 20 years.
that's great. I mean, you know, most people can't leave their house without double locking stuff and worrying about whatever. So why that kind of brings me to a question, you know, why is small town America so white dominated? How come, you know, minorities and alternative lifestyles, how come they don't go to these small towns in America?
Well, you would have to ask them. I I don't think that I think they would be accepted. We certainly have a Hispanic population here. Not that there's any, and lots of people that they're actually building windmills in Ashland County. I think we're on our 4th project, and we'll have, when they're done, I don't know, pretty close to 500 windmills. So lots and lots of people working on those construction projects, and I just don't hear of any problems at all. So I think it becomes I'll give you an example, and this might help. We have a small hospital here, and our middle daughter is actually an administrator there, and they were recruiting a new doctor, and they asked us to have Julie, my wife and I, to have a cocktail party for her, which we did. And she was retiring from the service. She'd been 20 years in the service and was looking for a place for starter practice. She was African American. And then we had a great time. She was a charming lady. We enjoyed meeting her. And Ann took her back to the airport, and she said, as a way of saying, no, I'm not coming. She said, you know, there's nobody there that looks like me. So that's understandable, right? I mean, so in order to have a minority population, it's a chicken and egg deal, right? If we had 10% minorities, I don't think there'd be any problem recruiting and getting 12. And God, we'd love to have them because we need people. But I understand nobody looks like me. And she thought we were a long ways from a Dillard's too, but that was a different, which we are.
So you're a teacher, like, give people an idea on why Missouri gets such a bad rap from stereotypes of being, you know, what Missouri people are. I mean, you know, if you ask somebody in Missouri, they are like, basically there's a lot of bad stereotypes in Missouri. Why is that?
I think it has to do a lot with like rural areas that are horribly underdeveloped, that were either you know, part of like being plopped down on the railroad somewhere, or being out in the boonies. And there's just a lot of like meth and drug use in those areas. And so when people think of Missouri, they think, oh, it's just a bunch of rednecks doing meth. So if you're like along the I-70 corridor, you know, Kansas City, Columbia, St. Louis, it's actually, I'd say, you know, it's a very modern area of the country. A lot, you know, most people fly over that area, but generally it's pretty nice. I mean, obviously we know St. Louis has some horrible areas, but overall it's still a modern city. But then if you go north of 70 or south of 70, it just starts going downhill from there. And I think mostly that's what people know Missouri for.
Yeah. Is it changing? So I know you haven't lived in the state for a long time, but you've been there long enough and you're a smart guy.
Years, yeah.
What's that?
16 years.
Yeah. Well, that's a long time. How has Missouri changed in the time that you've been there?
I honestly don't see that, because if you're coming to a place like Missouri, I think it's far enough from the coasts, either way you look at it, to where people are really getting away from it. They're not just moving because it's a little cheaper to buy a house in Idaho or Nevada. They're moving because they want a completely different culture. So maybe besides housing prices going up a bit, but I think that's just same thing as in the rest of the country. I don't think it really has changed the culture at all. I know Kansas City actually has gotten a lot better in the 16 years that I've been in Missouri. It's been revitalized all over the place, and I don't think it's really gentrification either, because it's still way cheaper to live there than anywhere else in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not like super well versed in that kind of terminology, but obviously it's getting nicer, which I'm assuming that's the definition of gentrification. But obviously, some people see it as a negative connotation.
Yeah, I mean, it's controversial because you push poor people out. Yeah. So, what is the culture of Missouri then that people are gonna experience when they move there from wherever they're fleeing from, or to start a new life?
Well, I think there's a huge difference in the areas that you live in. Where I live, the culture is small town, laid back. I mean, our town is 21,000 in city limits, but most of the expansion is happening outside of city limits. So it's more like 60,000 in the area, which probably has at least doubled in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But it's laid back. People just want to do their own thing. They want to grow their garden. They want to drive their big trucks and just live a simple life. But if you're in Kansas City, if you're moving there for somewhere that's probably a little bit more wealthy, you're probably looking for a nice suburb to live in, which obviously Kansas City has its own culture. It's I'd say probably one of the biggest small towns kind of feel for it. I mean, it's a huge city because it was designed for the car, which obviously is in some cases negative, but depending on how you want to live. I mean, if you go down to the Ozarks, I think that's the picture you got up on the screen right there. I mean, that place is its own world. I have a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law that lives there, and I mean, they moved there from Southern California as well, and they bought a giant house right on the waterfront because, again, they were tired of the whole California thing. They were living in a cheap 2-bedroom apartment there, and they bought literally a giant house on the water because that's the price difference.
Mm-hmm.
But that has its own culture. I mean, people there are they're either there because they've been living there for decades and it's got its own poor areas, or they're there because they've got money either from other parts of the country. Because during the summer, I think the population in the Ozarks triples.
Yeah.
Because most people don't live there the rest of the year. They just come down there to party all summer. So that place is its own thing. If you go way down south, I mean, that whole Ozark region, I'd say that's probably the worst part of the state because it's all just like 500-person towns and meth labs everywhere. I go down there every year to watch a rally race, but other than that, and maybe camping, I wouldn't really go in that area. Because when I was looking for teaching jobs, that's the one thing I noticed is there's tons and tons of job openings out down there because nobody wants to move there. Nobody wants to work there because they're just these little pockets of towns that were there, since Missouri became a state or before even that. and they're just slowly dying out because there's nothing there. There's no large city nearby. I mean, besides Springfield, but that's more like west side. So pretty much southeast Missouri, I'd say, is the prettiest part of the state, but also the poorest and the place you kind of want to stay away from. And then if you go north Missouri, that's all just farms. It's all farm towns.
Looks like Iowa.
There's nothing there. Yeah, it's pretty much southern Iowa.